Welcome to The State of Us.
Beyond mainstream cable news and party lines, with a millennial and a boomer, The State of Us pushes past the noise and uncovers all the issues that matter.
Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
Without a doubt, 2020 has been significantly different, I would say, than most of us would have guessed at the end of 2019. In most ways, it's been worse than we thought it would be. Obviously, COVID has changed many of our lives. But as we come to a close in 2020 and are looking to 2021, the Wall Street Journal found three major reasons that 2021 could be a lot better than you might think. And today, we're going to look at those three different things. Lance and I will break them down, talk a little bit about if we agree, if there's anything else we would throw in there. And we're also going to review all of the books from The State of Us this year and give you at least two recommendations from each of us to go read, things that we think are going to hopefully change your outlook for 2021 and maybe help further the goal of this show. But of course, we couldn't begin a conversation on why 2021 will be better than 2020 without
True Chat senior historian and an educator of more than 30 years. Here is your friendly redneck liberal, Lance Jackson.
Well, isn't that the beauty of a new year? It gives us a fresh start. And whether the upcoming year is better or not, at least we get to have that attitude change to where we're going to give it a chance, and we're going to try to find the positives. And hopefully that puts us in a more positive mindset. And if you're in a more positive mindset, then hopefully more positive things happen to you. So it's a great way to be, and it's a great idea to live your life that way. So today's episode is going to give us a chance to do that. With that, we are going to go out with a blockbuster word of the show, oligopsony. An oligopsony is the purchase of food or catering, control of the purchase of a commodity or service in a given market by a small number of buyers. The spelling is oligopsony. Oligopsony. As if you are someone who practices this, you are an oligopsonist. And if you know somebody who does this, they are oligopsonistic. That is the adjective form. So oligopsony is the word of the day.
All right. That is definitely, Lance is pulling out the thesaurus here, or he just got lucky in the dictionary and came across a particular one that my guess is hopefully most of our listeners have never heard before and may likely never hear again.
I think I just won, because if you can get that into a statement, I just said it to describe it and spell it. So, oligopsony. I love it.
Oligopsony.
But it has to do with business and food, catering. So it does go with the show today, folks. So I'm not just, I'm using a word that does go with the show information. Oligopsony.
Okay. Oligopsony.
And I may become very oligoptimistic. I don't know.
Okay. So a question of supply, not demand, is the first thing that the Wall Street Journal brings us. And remember, folks, if you want to check out this article, it's linked at thestateofus.org, thestateofus.org. That's our website. We've got the article linked there, our list of books, and a bunch of other resources. So be sure to check it out at some point if you haven't yet. Most recessions, Lance, begin when rising interest rates or stressed financial markets undercut the demand for goods and services, driving up unemployment, right? Which further crimps demand. So it's a continuous cycle of the demand for products being depressed, right? Hence the depression. Although in this instance, what we see, and we've got Lance knew immediately that this was going to be my article of choice for today because it has charts and graphs in it. We have a nice graph here that shows the repressed consumer, right? So the issue, Lance, what we're seeing here is sort of a V-shaped recovery that typically would ensue. But this disaster, which is the most widespread and longest lasting in a century, isn't over. There was a partial V-shaped recovery in the third quarter as lockdowns were lifted, but since the pandemic was never brought under control, restrictions and social distancing never ended, which indeed was recently tightened. And so when you look at this chart, what you see is this mismatch between we have demand, but not the supply to meet the demand, which is usually not the issue.
Exactly. And since, people would argue, well, but we haven't come back yet. And, so therefore, does that mean it's going to continue to be bad? The author of the article is saying, well, okay, the reason we haven't come back is because we truly haven't come all the way back yet. So we've seen some growth and some improvement at a time when we still haven't fully recovered from this, when we're still dealing with partial lockdowns and social distancing and restrictions on dining and entertainment and travel. And so therefore, when we do finally get this under control, there's even more room for growth. And so that's why we can take a positive look at this as we come into the new year, is that with the introduction of the vaccines and the rollouts of this, and as more people begin to take it, and even with the new strains that are starting to come up, that it looks like the vaccine is going to take care of those, that the confidence level is that once this all gets settled, the room for growth is still there. We're still being tightened up by this virus. Things still aren't open. Even though some people are living their lives that way, there are still many people who aren't, who are just waiting for the opportunity to go to the movies, go to a ball game, shop in person, and do all of these things that will boost the economy once all the restrictions and social distancing have ended.
A snapback, if you will, right? Of there's people waiting to do this stuff. So it is very different in a lot of ways than the 2008 recession, right? But that's kind of what the article, Lance, points out, is that obviously if vaccines are effective, then the hope would be that most of the population could be vaccinated by mid-year in 2021, which would then, like you said, allow social distancing restrictions to end, or at least be greatly reduced. And therefore, realistically, you would see a snapback to closer to where we should be. And then that kind of leads into the next thing of, well, how is a snapback possible? Well, that's the next item, a policy response like no other. Whether or not you agree with what's been happening with the stimulus packages, the reality is that President Trump signing the $900 billion fiscal package brings the grand total to $3.5 trillion spent in less than a year, in less than 2 years, instead of 5 years, which was the 2007 to 2009 recession. So you have a 5-year span where we spent less money than we're going to spend in under 2 years, $3.5 trillion more than we've ever spent on any stimulus package in history. And one of the big things that included, and I was talking about this with somebody the other day, Lance, are those direct payments. And these were obviously the item of a lot of discussion back and forth. Why do people that didn't lose their job, why do they need the direct payment, right? In other words, basically my income has not changed as a result of COVID. I make the same money that I was making before. Why am I getting extra money? Whether or not you agree with this philosophy, the thinking would go that by giving it to you, it's extra money, which you will spend above and beyond what you usually would, in the hope that that makes up for the people who are out of work or who will not spend the money, and thereby lessening the reality of the depression. So that's at least one side of the equation of why some people would contend the direct payments have been part of why we haven't seen a worse recession.
Well, and that's why it's called a stimulus package, correct? Because it is stimulating the economy. And for example, we have bought so many things since we are staying at home. We've bought so many things online, and obviously there has to be someone who fills that order. And then there has to be someone who delivers that order. And those are all jobs that are created. And we read every day where, Walmart, Amazon, Myers, all, Kroger's, all these different places have hired extra people to be able to get these things to people's homes and to people's cars with curbside delivery and those items. That is a creation of economic stimulus in that it's created jobs. The other side of this is if we're spending more, that's more tax money collected, and local and state governments then also have more money to help those individuals that are in greater need, because those people, either because they're not working or they have lower income, lower wage jobs. They don't pay as much in taxes, yet they need more help. And so by stimulating the economy and having other people spend extra money, then that is more tax money becoming available to those local and state governments to spend on those people that are in need. So that's the way it works. We can have an argument as to whether it's the best way to spend the money or not, but that is the reason for it. I'm not saying that I totally agree with all of it, but that's why it's being done in the manner that it's being done.
Another reason to be hopeful for 2021 is that we haven't seen long-term economic damage sustained yet, or scars, you might call them. As a result of this recession, unlike the 2007-2008, we haven't seen scars. What are we talking about, and why does it mean you should be hopeful for 2021 and beyond? Well, to find out, keep it here on The State of Us. We'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
Lance, we've talked about why 2021 might be better than most of us originally thought it would be. We've talked about two major areas, and the last one that we were discussing was the payouts. And I thought, I just read this, Lance, in the mid-show break here, and I thought it was important to share with people because it kind of illustrates the point, or the argument, I guess, of direct payments, is that currently, right, with the new payments coming, all of the direct payments, if you total them up in aggregate, so not for each person, but the grand total of direct payments is more than the wages that have been lost as a result of the pandemic. So in other words, the government, right, has put more money back out to consumers than the money that was lost through wages as a result. Now, this is important to note, though, because I didn't want us to just blaze by this and not mention it, that it obviously affects, right, the lower wage earners the most. They also pay less in taxes, which is part of why we have not seen as big a hit economically. And so for many of them, the payments, right, have not made up for wages, and maybe unemployment hasn't either, or maybe they weren't eligible or whatever, may not have made up for that. But on the whole, and when you're talking on the broad scale of the economy and coming back and the snapback and all of that, and no long-term scars, that's kind of what you're looking at. And that's what leads us into no scars yet. Recessions typically, Lance, do that long-term damage, right, by wiping out entire businesses, along with hard to recreate relationships among customers, suppliers, and employees, and by keeping some people jobless so long that they leave the workforce altogether, right? Those are the people we talk about that you and I have harped on for years. When you look at the unemployment rate, it doesn't count people that have given up looking for a job. You're only unemployed if you're actively looking for work, as defined by the federal government. So if you have given up looking for work, then the unemployment rate doesn't count you anymore. So I think that that's really important to understand, is we haven't seen some of those typical scars yet, like we did in the 2007-2008 recession. It looks like many individual businesses, especially restaurants, right? Individually owned restaurants are going under, individually owned hospitality. But on the whole, the different sectors of the economy don't seem to be set on the course of total destruction.
That's very true. But before I comment on that, another thing that's going to be improved in 2021 is this show, right? Because we're going to begin January by releasing a Saturday episode. So if you like The State of Us and you know that we release on Tuesdays and Thursdays and you look forward to listening to your two shows, well, this coming Saturday, January 2nd, there will be a third episode that you can listen to. So it's not something that we're sold on doing all the time, but we're going to try it. So it's another reason to look forward to your 2021, that you may get some extra, in air quotes there, extra shows to listen to.
If you're listening to this episode on the radio and you want to hear that third episode, which is released this coming Saturday, or for you all that are listening right now, it's released on the 2nd of January, right? Check it out as a podcast. You can find all the ways to listen at thestateofus.org, but of course it's in all those places that you'd expect to find podcasts. So really, there's the opportunity for everybody to listen to it, Lance, and we want to know what people think. If people, have been experiencing Devon creature withdrawal over the past week or two, they can get a fill of that as well in that episode, because it's kind of it's a more informal conversation, I would say. So it is an interesting opportunity for people to tune in. But anyway, I know you're excited for that, Lance. I am too. But no long-term scars yet, at least from what we've seen.
These bankruptcies are well below the levels reached in previous recessions. So nobody's saying it's not bad, but the point is, when you compare it to previous recessions, so far it's not as bad as it is typically. So that's another reason to be positive. Not that anybody who's lost their business and all their years of hard work, that's not horrible, and we feel very badly for them and we wish them the best of luck in the future. But total numbers wise, it's not as bad as it's been before, which could mean that we see a bigger bounce back, that there are still no scars yet. So that's something to keep an eye on, is not just the unemployment rate, but the number of bankruptcies that are taking place. Because as the article points out, we could see some more when, the eviction moratoriums expire eventually, for homeowners and tenants. But, if they're forgiven or we see something else in a later stimulus package, then that could lead us to save some people from being spared bankruptcy court, which could then cause the economy to bounce back even higher, even better, even faster.
As we're moving, Lance, into 2021 here, especially with our listeners, a big part of what we do on the State of Us, or I should say, I guess, a regular part, is we try to help people see the different issues that they may not get from mainstream media, right? Or give them a different kind of perspective on what's happening through our lens, through the things that we can share in a unique way, and typically that we feel are the most important items to be paying attention to. And we had the opportunity, Lance, to cover 16 different books in 2020. And I think it was definitely one of the highlights of the year were some of those interviews that we had with the authors, because we not only read these books, folks, and when we say we read them, just to be clear, the goal is always that at least one of us has read the entire book prior to doing the interview with the author. And you probably know this, but that's different than the way that most programs do things. They're going to, get it to the host. The host may get to read a chapter or two, and they've been sent something by the publicist that gives them, a list of here's some questions you could ask. And they may craft those or adapt them, but generally speaking, that's pretty common on how it works. And there's nothing wrong with that. But the way we do it is we try to be more intentional with the books we choose. We try to choose things that we ourselves would be willing to read all of. And then we do the interview with the author, which is usually a little more long form. And I don't think, Lance, it's unfair to say that we're lifting ourselves onto a pedestal too much here by saying that we've had a number of authors that have told us that some of the interviews they've done with us are the best ones that they've gotten to do with their book, because it was obvious that we had read the book and had more specific questions.
Right. And they appreciated our questions. And I think what makes it interesting is we just don't talk about the book and what we drew from it and what you might like to read and why you would like to read it. But we take the time with every book, as you said, to interview the author. So you get their perspective and you get them to answer some of the questions that were raised by the book. And it's not just what made you write this book? And, we really enjoyed that book, but we dig into it with the author and we find out where, some of their anecdotal evidence came from and what their thoughts are and how it affects them personally, depending on the topic. Because we've done a wide variety. Yes, we did a lot of history books, but we've done some science books. We've done religious books. We did one on someone who studied pain and migraine headaches. So, there's a real plethora of different topics that we cover, and it makes it very stimulating conversation when you get to talk to these authors, and it makes you feel good when they notice the hard work that we've done by reading the entire book and coming up and trying to narrow down to 4 to 6 questions when we started out with 20.
People, I don't think, realize this, but even when we do 2 segments with an author, we're really only getting to ask them in the neighborhood of 4 to 7 questions, with it typically coming in right around 6. And for most of our books, I would say, are in that 300-page range, 200 to 300 pages, some longer, a few that are shorter. That's a difficult thing to do, to come away with only those questions. But at the same time, I think it lets us give people that taste of the book and decide if it's something that they're after, that they want to look at. And that's what Lance and I are going to talk about now, is we're going to look at the entire list, all 16 books from 2020, and we're going to give you our top 2 recommendations each, ones that we've read and ones that we can confidently pass along to you, to find out what our top books are for 2020. Keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
2020 was a big year in many ways. For Lance and I, one of the memorable notes is that just for The State of Us, and this doesn't count our independent reading, we got to read 16 different books. And we actually, in fairness to ourselves, we actually did read a couple of those in 2019 for 2020. So with not exactly 16 books in a year, but close to it. And there's a full list here, Lance. So I'm not sure that we're not going to read them all off, but we are going to talk about, some of the highlights. I think the 2 that you and I, both felt like stood out a lot. And then I'm sure that you and I will want to mention others. But at least for me are, Cosmos, Possible Worlds, and The Rise and Fall of the Bible by Timothy Beale. On that first one, Lance, Cosmos, I think it's just a great book all around. You don't have to love science. You don't have to love space. I mean, I remember, Lance, I know you were skeptical when we got the book, when I told you that we were going to get the book originally, that, this is about space. I'm not sure if this is really going to be the thing that I'm interested in. But really, it's not really just about space. It's about opening your mind to all these things happening, like the fact that honeybees have an advanced form of democracy.
That book was very well written to a layman who could understand it. The honeybees, and the one I go to, I've spent all summer as I've trimmed trees and chopped branches off of trees and cut a couple trees down on the property. It's like, I apologize, to the tree, because it talks as well about, the democracy of honeybees, but also the feeling and that the trees have, that it cries out to the point that other trees hear it and send food towards the tree who loses a branch. So it was very interesting reading and entertaining. It's hard to say that it wasn't a top 2 because the interview was fantastic. Andreanne was just amazing lady to talk to. Really enjoyed it.
In fact, it got 2 episodes.
It did get 2
right?
episodes, right? But as a historical person, Let the People Pick the President by Jesse Wegman about the Electoral College has been one that I've shared probably multiple times with friends, and one that we did early on, Barrio America, that talked about the demographic changes that immigrants have brought to the United States and into the major metropolitan cities, and how it's changed the market. I thought was very eye-opening. Still not, probably in my top 2, but ones that I wanted to mention, as well as, the one that did the best as far as listenership was Unconscious Bias in Schools. Was an education book that we did. So those are some, while I did enjoy Cosmos, I don't have it in my top 2, but those are some other ones as well that I really enjoyed and thought were very impactful to me.
And this is part of Lance and I talked about this before the show. This is really difficult, folks, because honestly, I think that Lance and I gained something from all of these books, which hopefully is a credit to our ability to, look at a book from a glance, and maybe the publicist's ability to get them titled well, for us to read accurate descriptions. I don't know what you want to credit it to, but it really is difficult to narrow it down because they all offer something. But as far as what's the most essential, right? I thought Cosmos Possible Worlds is nice because it's an opening of the mind, which is so much what we try to do here on The State of Us. And the other one that I felt, there's really 2 others that I feel like did that pretty well. But the other one that definitely has to be in my top 2 is The Rise and Fall of the Bible. The subtitle there is The Unexpected History of an Accidental Book. I want to give the caveat here that if you're somebody that, holds the Bible near and dear and you read the title of that and you wonder what it means, Timothy Beale, who wrote this book, has been religious pretty much his whole life, still is, and is very much a devoted professor of theology. And, he's committed, and he said even that later he wishes it was titled differently. He didn't decide the title, really, the publicist does. But he felt like it might keep some people from reading it, but I think you got to read it, because really what it is a very brief and very easy to read history of how the Bible came to be. Whether you are religious or not, the reality is that if you live in this nation, much of your life has been shaped by the book of books, right? Whether that's from people making decisions who use it to make decisions or say they use it to make decisions, whether it's in your own life, you've probably been influenced by it in one way or another, for better or worse. And realizing that this book that we all, have kind of made the book of books, right? The way it came to be, and also the idea that we are sold the Bible as a book of answers, when really Timothy Beale's contention is it's a book of questions, and how that fundamentally changes your thinking about something that you probably have strong opinions about already. Again, whether you're a strong advocate of it or don't buy into the Bible at all, when you change that line of thinking and you say, okay, let's approach this as a book of questions, you really start to question a lot of things. And I think that's part of why it's great, Lance, because again, in a very different way, it invites you to open your mind to a different way of thinking.
And I just want to mention before I comment, and I agree with everything you said there, but I want to mention The Presidents versus the Press as one of my favorite history books, as well as The Strenuous Life, the book that we read about Theodore Roosevelt, one of my most interesting presidents. I don't know if I say favorite, but he's a very interesting character to read about. But the 2 books that I pick as the best, now I've given you about 6 or 8 there that I liked.
You've given almost all of them honorable mentions.
Which you said we were going to do. We were going to talk about them. So I had my list, I made sure I mentioned everything.
Okay, we're probably not going to talk about all of them. And Lance is like, well, I really like this one and that one.
I didn't get to all of them. I picked 7. So, okay. Or 8. I picked 8. So I only talked about half of them.
Half of all the books.
Right.
Okay.
But my 2 favorites had to do with living your life and the afterlife, how to live your life and the afterlife. And they are Immortality, Inc. by Chip Walter. I found that just a fascinating read. Interviewing him was just full of mind-blowing ideas. But as you read the book, it's like, are you kidding me that this is what's going on? And it's just, it talks about, are we going to be able to live forever? And probably not in my lifetime. But when you read about the things that are being accomplished, it's just amazing how they're breaking down. And again, I'm not a science person, but it was just fascinating to read about all the things that are being done, that this is not just a sci-fi book about the possibility of living for an extremely long time, but they're breaking down why we as humans die, how the body deteriorates, and then how can we change that? And that it's actually possible to change, that we could extend people's lives, and not only just the quantity of life, but the quality of your life would improve, which is what I'm all about. It's not about quantity at all. It's the quality. And I've said that since I was a very young man, which I'm not anymore, is that quality of life is so much better than quantity, and the ability to prolong the quality of life that just fascinated me. And it was a very inspirational and uplifting read, and to see all the work that's being done and the people behind the scenes who are the motivation behind it are some real movers and shakers in our society. Even above that was The Rise and Fall of the Bible by Timothy Beale. That was my number 1 book all year. And not because he's a contemporary of mine, that as I read the book, I found out that he basically graduated from high school and college at the same time I did very did a lot of the same things that I did as a very young man, and including getting married, and that he's still married to his wife, that they got married in their early 20s. And same thing here, so a lot of similarities there, but he's read the same Bibles that I've read, as well as even more, I'm sure. But it was just that he chose that path. And you said it. I mean, what I wrote down before you started was the Bible is a book of questions, not answers. And there's just a fascinating incident that he talks about where the preacher throws out the parable of the mustard seed to the congregation and says, okay, what does this mean to you? And they go on and that's the sermon. That instead of the pastor of the church talking about this is what it means, he says, no, here's what's said in the book, in the Bible. What does that mean to you guys? And, there's a teenage boy who talks. There's an elderly lady that talks. There's a businessman that opens up, and the congregation talks about what that verse means to them and what it does to their life. Let me go to church there. I could maybe handle something like that, because then all of a sudden you're just totally changing the perspective of what you're reading. That it's not do this, do that, do this, do that. This is what you have to do to get here and to be here and to achieve this. No, it's like, hey, here's the scenario. What's it mean to you? Okay. What's it mean to you? Okay. Now let's talk about that. And it's like, that's just mind blowing. It totally changes the way a lot of people would look at religion, but it spoke to me because that's basically put into words the way I look at things. It's that it asks questions, not answers. So by far that was my top book, and, no plug there. I'm not getting paid for it. It really was inspirational to read it, and kind of at the time with the pandemic kind of kept me going, because we read that book and did that at the very start of the pandemic.
April.
And I drew on that. Well, I actually read it the last time I was out in society, in March. I took it with us when we were, on spring break and relaxing. And it was coming home from that when they announced in our state of Ohio that schools were no longer going to be in session and that you need to stay at home. So that was really the last time I was out, was when I read that book. And so I drew on it on multiple occasions over the last 9 months.
I just checked, Lance. I think it's just about 200 pages of actual reading, maybe just under. There's more pages than that, but a lot of them are, notes and subtext sort of stuff, but just a little under 200 pages of actual reading. It's a quick book. It's a small book. And you can pick it up for $12 approximately. I just nothing immediately comes to mind, Lance, that I could tell people is a better expenditure of $12. And that is, again, we don't get paid to review these books. We just do it on our own. The only thing is we do get these books for free. We don't actually pay for them. We get sent review copies, but we're not under an obligation to say anything nice about them. And so Lance and I both agree The Rise and Fall of the Bible stands out, I think, as the book that we can both agree on for the year is by far and away the best value for money conversion. And again, that is irregardless, I think, of whether you are religious or not, or somewhere in between. I think it is an excellent book for anybody in today's society, even though it actually wasn't written in the past couple of years. It's a few years older. But most of these other books are more recent, and that's why, Lance, Immortality Inc. was a very close runner-up for me. You mentioned it. I just think the thing that struck me in the interview, because I actually we actually did the interview in February, so this was before the shutdown. I was in person with Chip Walter, who's a National Geographic explorer, and I got to ask him, what's your feeling on, what's the biggest takeaway that you would hope people get? And he said that to him, and he was very skeptical when he started to go to write this book. And I think he even mentioned, Lance, right, that what he thought the book was going to be and what it actually became were not at all the same.
That's true.
The reason you should read it is this. He says that he sincerely believes it's not a question of if anymore. It's just a question of when. and that within the next 10 years, what's happening right now in, out west, in Silicon Valley, the billions of dollars that are being invested in this, drastically going to change the way that we think. And that's the key. Lance mentioned this, not just about death, but about life itself. The quality, not quantity, because that's what they're talking about here is not just let's up life expectancy. They're talking about let's make it so that you can live 200 years as if you were 30 years old. That's what they're talking about. It sounds, Lance and I'm sure a lot of you out there are like, what? That's same thing Lance and I thought. All I can tell you is read the book. Read the book. Because, boy, you read about what they're doing right now. And what we have learned and the obstacle that there is to overcome. I think Lance and I are close to that. It's probably not a question of if, it's probably more of a question of when. And it's a fascinating book. Again, applies to everybody because we're all alive. So, wherever you come down on it, you've got something to take away. But, to your point about the rise and fall of the Bible, Lance, that's kind of what we try to do on this show, right? Is this idea of having that conversation with people, throwing the questions out there and allowing us to have a respectful dialogue about these issues.
That's exactly what we do here at True Chat, as our mission is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. And if you've enjoyed today's show and other shows that you've listened to, talk to us about your friends. And then they ask you, well, where can we find this? Where can we listen to this podcast? Well, tell them we're on Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, and everywhere podcasts are found. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention very quickly that if you enjoyed our discussion on the books, please go to the website where you can find the list of all the books. And I would highly recommend all of them. I don't think we read a bad book. We did not read one this year where I did not learn something. So I enjoyed all of the books. So no slight intended to any of the authors. We enjoyed the interview and the time they gave us, and we thoroughly enjoyed their books. So go check out the whole list as well. I would just have to say that before we sign off.
Thestateofus.org, thestateofus.org. The entire book list is there. Check it out for yourself. Go pick up a copy of hopefully one of these books. It means a lot to us, but hopefully you'll get a lot out of it. I think I'm not sure that any of them, Lancer, I would say is not a good value for your money, but by far and away, if you got to choose, 1, 2, or 3, The Rise and Fall of the Bible, Cosmos, Possible Worlds, and Immortality, Inc. Are all right there at the top. So do check them out. The State of Us is a syndicated radio program and a podcast. The podcast is released by 4 a.m. Tuesdays and Thursdays, but remember, a special edition of the podcast available this Saturday. That would be January 2nd. Saturday, January 2nd, extra episode of The State of Us. Please check it out. Let us know what you think. And be sure to check your local talk market. See if they carry The State of Us on a radio station. If they don't, call them up. Tell them they should. For The State of Us on True Chat in Urbana, Ohio, I'm Justin T. Weller.
I'm Lance Jackson.
Special thanks, as always, to our recording producer who is back with us, Devin McCain, editing producer Bradley Butch, and thank you all for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.